Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And thank you, Serenity, for everything that she does. If you have not made it out to the Southern Festival of Books, I will argue it is one of the best festivals in the country. We're going to get Don here to the Southern Festival of Books. You were going to come to Nashville a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Little thing called the pandemic.
Yep.
Kind of threw that in a lurch. So we are all obviously here tonight because of this man and the work that he does. You may know him as an author. You may know him because of his political action. You may know him because of his expertise on the border. But we're all lucky just to get to know you a little bit better tonight.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Can you all understand me through the Okay.
We good?
Cool. Yeah.
It's a good mic system. It's good. So we're obviously here to talk about this powerhouse of a book. I don't know how many of you have had the chance to start reading it yet. It's just the best way for me to describe how good this is, that it truly is a powerhouse of a book. But because I'm a newsman, we've got to get to what Serenity just mentioned, which is the somewhat breaking news of the time, is this word of your retirement.
Yeah.
And that's a heartbreaker. We're not sure about this. You didn't consult us as your readers, but I want you to talk about why, because it is a pretty remarkable decision about what you're going to do.
Yeah. I didn't consult anybody.
I hope your wife.
I did consult my wife.
Good call.
We talked about it for a while.
That's good.
It's been a hard decision. You know, writing these books is something I love. Booksellers and readers have been so good to me. Every material thing I have in this world, you know, I owe to readers, to you all, and to booksellers. But I've come to the point where I think we're at a existential moment in American democracy. Some of you might know I've been pretty active on Twitter over the past 4 or 5 years and tweeting out about things that I think are wrong and producing videos in support of some candidates and in opposition to others. But I don't think we're out of the woods. I think the next year or two is going to be critical in the life of this country. And I just thought that I should devote whatever talents I have to that fight.
So, not to pull a Barbara Walters on you here, but walking away from writing, which is something you have always wanted to do since you were a little kid.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you can truly say, I'm going to put this away forever? Or do you feel you are so compelled because of what's happening in the country that you feel like, I got to do this and make it my full attention?
I need to do this and give it my full attention.
Okay.
This is my decision now. I'm almost positive that I'm retired from writing. I don't want to write books just for the sake of publishing or for the sake of a paycheck. With this trilogy, I've been at this trilogy for 27 years. It's the first book I've written about my hometown in Rhode Island. And it feels like a wrapping up.
Okay.
It feels like a homecoming, and this feels like the right time to move on and into what I'm doing.
So what we're all going to do is let him do this for a while, and then we're just going to say, okay, Don, you did that. That was great.
All right.
Now let's get back to writing some more books. But, I mean, if this is the way to go, this is a great way to go.
Well, thank you.
And you know, obviously we're all readers, right? We're all, and especially I think a lot of us are fans of crime fiction. And you can just tell in the way that you wrote this that you have trimmed the fat. There isn't an ounce of fat in any of these paragraphs. And I'm going to give you the credit. I'm going to give your editor some credit too.
Sure,
as I imagine
Jennifer
that
Burrell,
is.
yeah.
But I wanted to talk about the inspiration for this book.
Yeah.
a modernization of the Iliad,
Yes.
which is fascinating if you think about it. But how did you come to that concept?
27 years ago, I realized how ignorant I was. I mean that. I have a very narrow education in African history and military history, a BA in African history and MA in military history. So I'm a specialist in African military history, which, you know, in addition to making you a hardcore unemployable,
Right.
narrows, you know, your knowledge of literature. I've always been pretty conversant in Shakespeare because I made my living for a while directing Shakespeare,
Yep.
you know, over in the UK. So I picked up one of those great book lists, you know, dozens of them.
Sure.
They're probably here. And I said, I'm going to read my way through the thing. It took me 7 years. But early in that, obviously, you come to the Greek classics and the Roman classics, including the Iliad, and very pertinent to these three books, the Aeneid. And it struck me, and I know this is going to sound weird, it struck me how similar some of the stories in the Iliad were to real-life crime things that had happened when I was growing up in New England. The Iliad, you know, famously the Trojan War starts over a quarrel over a woman, Helen of Troy. There was a conflict that started between Irish and Italian mobs in New England over a woman at a beach party. 10 years and 36 lives later, it wrapped up. And I went, my God, that's the Trojan War. But just like the Trojan War, the woman was a pretext, you know, an excuse for a fight for money and power,
Right.
as all mob wars are. And so that was the inspiration for this book.
And it's fascinating to hear you talk about this now. And you'll read about Pam, who is the Helen of Troy in this novel. And the way that you even describe her for the first time walking out and when they're on the beach. And she's almost mythic to Danny,
Yeah.
the protagonist. He's like, you know, and so when I was reading about that you got the idea from that, I thought, oh, that's brilliant. That really works. So you mentioned something. Many of us know you best from your knowledge of California and the border.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a little bit more about
Okay.
that in a little bit from now. But what I wanted to add, and I said this to you before, is when you read this book, you practically smell Rhode Island. It comes off the pages. You can sense just the details about this are incredible. And I naturally, and correctly, assumed you were a California boy.
Right.
But
A
you're
lot of
not.
people think, yeah.
You're a Rhode Island kid.
Yeah.
And so what made you decide, A, to set the book there, and B, to set it in the 1980s?
Yeah, it's a complicated answer, I'm afraid. I left Rhode Island when I was 17. Grew up in this, what I have described, I think accurately, as a Bruce Springsteen sort of town.
Yeah.
You know, a beach town that had seen better days. It's since rebounded, by the way. But when I was growing up there, the expectations of us were not high. The factories had closed. We had a lot of empty red brick buildings. The fisheries were down, you know. My old man used to drive me to within about 500 yards of the fish processing plant and say, you know, if you don't study, you don't buckle down, because I was a bad student.
This is where you're going.
You're going to spend your life shoveling guts in there. So I left, you know, and I went to school in Nebraska, and then ended up in Africa, and then England and China, and eventually settled on the West Coast, around San Diego. About 10 years ago, my wife and I started to go back to Rhode Island to help take care of my mother, who was in her declining years.
Okay.
And people, you all know what that's about, I think. And so it was a melancholy kind of time.
Right.
But during those months, and we stayed longer and longer every year as necessity dictated, I started to fall in love with the place again.
It took coming back
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. No one's ever accused me of maturity, Jeremy. But I think it took a certain kind of maturity to see it through different eyes.
Sure.
And to value it, to feel the soulfulness of it.
Yeah.
Did any of you see the movie Coda? That could have been filmed in my town.
Okay.
In fact, it was just a few fishing ports up the coast. I really related to it. My wife was sobbing at the end of that film because her brother was deaf.
Okay.
Our first dates were at sign language classes, so I could communicate with her brother.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah. We still use it, like at parties and things. You know, I want to go home. Boring.
Gosh, that is...
Boring home.
You need to teach us some of this. So
Yeah,
we can
yeah.
use this at like dinner parties. to
Yeah,
like
no, really,
celebrate
it
stuff.
works out.
That's remarkable that that you and your wife have that special connection.
Yeah.
And have that connection to that movie and then to your home.
Yeah.
I think so many of us leave our homes as young people.
Right.
We go off to college or a new job or something like that, and it takes returning home as an adults in
Yeah.
our 40s and 50s to say, you know what, I know why this is I'm fond of this place.
Yeah.
And but you also write about it with true honesty in the sense of you're not showing a shiny veneer of,
No.
of this community.
No.
And I think that's what makes it resonate. And I think that's honestly why Danny Ryan, who is the main character of this book, he is so likable. He is so identifiable. And you start reading this book and you're rooting for him from page one. And then you find out he's part of a crime family.
Yeah.
And he does some kind of bad things.
Yeah.
And I wondered about the challenge of writing a truly sympathetic character that does bad things.
I've done it a lot, you know, in writing about Mexican drug cartels and drug traffickers and heroin addicts and crooked cops, you know. See, I think that's humanity. I think we all have a unlimited capacity for good and evil in us, you know. Almost every culture that I know of tells the same story. About, you know, there are two dogs inside us or two wolves or whatever, right? You all know this story.
Right.
And which one wins? Well, it's the one you feed, you know? And that's Danny. I've known the Danny Ryans of the world all my life.
Right.
I grew up with them.
Right.
Right. I grew up with most of the characters in this book.
Yeah.
Danny's fatal flaw is loyalty. You know, he's intensely loyal, I think, because his mom abandoned him when he was a baby to a neglectful father, and he attached himself to this sort of faux family, which was a crime family. And he has several chances in this story, in fact, in all the whole trilogy, to get out. But that loyalty keeps him in there, and it keeps him doing bad things. But, you know, when I'm writing a character, I don't want to be objective. I might have my own ethical or moral ideas about what the character does, but that's not my job, right? My job is to bring the reader into a world and show them that world through the character's eyes and points of view. So when I'm in the typing, as I say, right, I'm completely subjective. You know, I'm just trying to be in that person, in that character, and experience the world through their eyes.
I wondered how many of these characters you grew up with in reading this book, because especially those of us that are from small towns, regardless of where you are in the United States.
That's right.
It's almost like it's not a cast of characters in the sense, but you can almost identify like, oh yeah, I know that guy. Oh yeah, I know that guy. Oh, I know her. I know her, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's why this book will resonate with so many people, because even though it may be in an area of the world that you're not that familiar with, I have to ask you, because not only did you bring it up, but I almost wanted to do a true and false about Don Winslow. Because if you look, seriously, you need to read his Wikipedia page because it's insane. Like I could sit there and say, true or false, were you a safari guide?
True.
Well, that's enough to like just sit here and talk about. Like
I was a
for-
photographic safari guide. I want to be very clear about that.
I mean, but it's the lives that you have led. I think that which is fascinating, but also was the end game always to be a writer?
Yes.
Okay, it didn't matter if you were a private investigator in New York or a safari guide. This is the end game.
This was the end game from Jump Street.
How about it?
Yeah, listen, my dad was a sailor who loved books. My mom was a librarian who loved a sailor.
Right.
You know, that's the story, really. I grew up around this great storyteller. My old man was one of the great raconteurs of all time. I used to hide under the dining room table when he'd have his Navy buddies over. And they'd pretend to think I wasn't there. You know, I was fooling them. And listen to them tell stories.
Wow.
You know.
What a training ground for
Oh
a
my
writer
God!
right there, huh?
And then we always had books around, and my parents allowed us to read anything we wanted at any age. I don't think it's a coincidence. I have one sibling, an older sister, who's written 44 published novels.
Right. I knew she was successful as well.
Yeah, you know. So books were always sacred. Books were always important. So that's what I wanted to be. Now it took the world a number of decades to agree.
realize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and we're going to talk about that in a minute too, because if you don't know about Don's advocacy for other writers, it's so worth your time to watch a couple pieces on. CBS does fantastic reporting on literature.
Yeah.
And CBS Sunday Morning and CBS This Morning, they just do great profiles. We're going to talk about that in just a minute because I want to talk about that. But I don't want to veer too far from the book because there's some other questions that I have for you about this. This is ultimately a story about families. Right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the Murphys and the Morietis. Am I saying it right?
Moretti's, yeah.
Moretti's, okay. So I come from a half Irish, half Italian family.
Oh my God.
So when you said some of these names, I was like, oh my God, this is, I completely identify with this. But I wanted to ask about what it is about that. Because when you think about, you talk about your background with Shakespeare, the great stories of our time, from Romeo and Juliet to The Godfather, it's all about clashing families.
It is. Well, Godfather is literally a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry IV.
There we go.
With the moral poles reversed, but it's exactly the same plot.
And I wonder what it is about that we keep returning to that well. Is it because there's something that we all as readers can identify with?
Yeah.
Or is it just the drama is so high because we know what it's like with our families?
I think all great American stories at the end of the day come down to family and the road. The family and the journey, and the great stories involve both. You know, I was talking with someone in the audience about the banned books, and I was looking at Grapes of Wrath, family,
Right.
and the road.
That's right.
I think that's the American journey in this trilogy. You know, the second one takes place mostly in Hollywood, and the third mostly in Las Vegas, although some characters stay in Rhode Island. But it's Danny's journey west.
Okay. So it's Danny's Road.
It's Danny's Road with what remains of his family and his friends.
You need to stop talking about
I know.
because we don't want to ruin.
I was going to read the last page of the book.
That's not cool, Don. There's a lot of people that have not finished it
All
yet.
right.
So I want to talk about you writing crime fiction.
Yeah.
I think you have a great saying about this, is that crime fiction is our extremes.
Yeah.
It shows the best of us and the worst of us. And I wonder did you naturally choose it? Were you like, I'm going to be a crime writer? Or was it more of or did you instinctively know, if I can harness this will fuel my stories for as long as you want to write stories, because of the extremities that are in these books? I
started reading crime fiction. I read Sherlock Holmes as a kid.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It was fun. I was on. Did a thing with David Baldacci the other night, and we were talking about reading Sherlock Holmes as a kid. Sure. You know, incessantly. But I didn't read sort of modern crime fiction till I was in my 20s, until I was a private investigator in New York. I was a very low-level street operative in Times Square and Hell's Kitchen and Harlem.
And you got stabbed there once.
I did get stabbed.
We should probably tell that story, but I'll ask you about that next. Yes.
I started reading guys like Lawrence Block, Charles Willeford, because I related to them. You know, I was reading Lawrence Block's stories about Hell's Kitchen. That's where I was every day, every night. Right. I knew some of the real-life prototypes of those characters.
Right.
You know, the Irish Mob and Hell's Kitchen, and you know, a lot of people. I was on Times Square before Mickey Mouse got there, when it was, you know,
when it was, yeah,
it was down and dirty. You thought you were walking on seashells. You were walking on crack files.
Well, now you got to tell everybody how you got stabbed.
It's very embarrassing. I got stabbed in the butt.
But still, you can claim you got stabbed.
Yeah,
and
I can claim it
survived,
was.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. It was when I thought I should probably go back to graduate school. You know, after years on the street, I got stabbed in a trying to find a runaway, which was part of my job for a while.
Yeah.
And somebody objected to that.
It should be in, I think, your author bio somewhere.
He got stabbed
Survived
in
a
the butt.
stabbing in the butt,
Yep.
just to really grab people's attention.
I still have the scar,
I still got
Jeremy.
the scar. I'll show it to you if you want to see it. So I was going to ask you about the trilogy, but I struggled with this because you never want to give away too much. But you said from the get-go that this was a story that was going to unfold in Vegas and in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Is there a connection there as to why? Can you tell us without ruining?
Let me work on that for a second. I think so. You could read these books just as crime novels. That was my goal, without any reference to the classics whatsoever or knowledge of.
Yeah.
But they follow the plots and the themes of the Aeneid, the Odyssey, the Iliad, and several Greek tragic plays. Because I wanted to follow these characters throughout their entire life cycle, not just the fall of Troy.
Okay.
So every character has an analogous character in the classics.
Okay.
Every one of them.
Okay.
So Danny Ryan is actually Aeneas, who is a minor character in the Iliad, but that's why I chose him. Because he has to leave, he has to wander the world trying to find a place to settle, and then he builds an empire, which in the Aeneid is Rome.
Sure.
It's the founding myth of Rome. So I wanted to create this crime epic that sort of matched the history of American crime in those years.
That's what I loved about, and you all realize this when you read the book, is what Danny is a supporting character in life in a lot of ways.
Right, he's a
he
reactor.
Is not the star.
Right.
He is the kind of the leftover. He's the, I don't want to say the black sheep of the family, but
He's the son-in-law.
he is. He's the
He's the
son-in-law.
son-in-law,
He is
yeah.
the son-in-law of the
Yeah.
crime family,
Yep.
and that's what I think I loved about it so much, because you don't see it coming.
Yeah.
You like I said, you immediately identify with him, and you like him, and you know he's got whatever, if you call it a moral code or what you have, but he just wants to belong. He wants to
Yeah.
prove himself, which I think a lot of people identify with. So the fact that you have a character like this that then goes on to create this empire is going to be a great ride. It's
thank you.
it's going to be fun for all of us to read.
You know, we often think casually that the story of the fall of Troy was told in the Iliad. It's not. It ends in the middle. It begins in the middle and ends in the middle. The fall of Troy, that tragic story, is told by Aeneas to a woman he's in love with, and she with him. And in wanting to get to know him in his past, how he washed up on these shores, she asks him. And he says the following line, which was one of the big motives for my writing this trilogy. He says, "Sorrow, unspeakable sorrow, you ask me to bring to life once more, my queen."
Wow.
And he tells her the story of the fall of Troy and how he has to leave. And to me, it was so poignant. And I thought about this guy who loses virtually everything and has to wander the world, trying still to take care of his family.
Right, right.
You know?
Oh, it's
So,
it's great.
and in the Aeneid, he's shipwrecked on what is now Carthage and what is now Tunisia. And he walks into a cave. And he sees murals of the fall of Troy. He sees himself, he sees his wife, he sees his home, his friends. And I thought, what could be the modern day equivalent of that? Movies.
Yeah.
Hollywood, someone making a movie about the New England gang wars in which he was
my
a
God.
player.
This
And
is
so that's book 2.
All right, there you go, yo.
So there you go.
There we go. That's.
And then where do you go to build an empire?
You didn't know that you were going to give this kind of education.
Are
about
you
the
all bored
classics
out of
here.
your minds?
Be like, can we talk about
I can be so
the border
tedious.
war, please? Well, that's fascinating. I'm so glad that you brought that up because it gives, again, once you read it, it gives us something to look forward to, which is what you want in a trilogy. I want to talk a little bit about your advocacy for other writers.
Okay.
I don't know how many of you got to read The Chain by Adrian McKenty. So if you haven't read this book, it is not for the faint of heart, but it was a monster success. Last summer? Was it last summer or 2 summers ago? 2 summers ago. So when you get home tonight, if you haven't watched the pieces about Adrian, watch him because he literally was evicted with his family from this home. He quit writing and was, I think, an Uber driver.
Yes, in
and maybe
Melbourne,
working in a
Australia.
bar,
Yep.
and then enters Don Winslow. And you have to explain how you made this connection to him.
Adrian put out an announcement that he was going to quit writing.
Did you do it on Twitter? Did you do it on social media?
Yeah, it was all social media.
Social media, okay.
And I had known his early work. He wrote these tremendous Irish cop novels, the Sean Duffy novels.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I wrote back to him and said,
Just out of the blue.
yeah.
You never met at a writer's conference, nothing.
No, we only met after The Chain came out. We did this sort of thing in New York together.
Okay.
And I said, hey, Adrian, hold on, dude. Just pause for a second.
Yeah.
Don't do this right now. Let me talk to my agent, a guy named Shane Salerno, who's my best friend. We've been together. I was his first client. He's a A-list screenwriter in his own right. Wrote a little movie called Armageddon.
Oh.
Just co-wrote all of the sequels to Avatar.
Oh, he's doing fine.
He's all right.
He's doing okay now.
But he decided he wanted to rep authors, and particularly authors who he thought were undervalued, such as me. Wow. I did a book called The Power of the Dog, the first of that drug trilogy. After Dog, I had $37 in the bank. Right? And I signed with Shane, and 2 days later I had a lot more than that. But so really all I did was make a phone call to Shane, and Shane did the rest. I played a very, very minor part in this.
But you were the key, and as the great story goes, is that then helped Adrian get this book out that then literally changed his life. It has changed his life.
Oh yeah,
can really provide for his family quite well now.
Yep.
And
Adrian's good. Look, Adrian McKenty never needed my help as a writer.
he just needed
somebody to get in the ring for him.
and not to use the analogy incorrectly, but like a link in the chain. He needed a chain.
Oh,
that
there
was
you go.
getting him to the chain.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
See that? So I just think that that's really great. And a little known writer by the name of Stephen King put out a nice little tweet saying about this book, it is a must read. And so it's always nice when a little Stephen King nudge comes your way and you can say, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming, when someone like Stephen King, and as good a writer as Stephen King is, he's that good a human being.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Did
you guys see him when he came to Nashville a couple years ago? He came on I can't remember honestly what book it was, but it was at the Ryman. And it was so awesome. It was just great to see him, and he was really funny, and I was so glad to see him. If you get to see him, please do so. So I would be remiss if I didn't jump into newsman mode for a moment and talk about the border crisis.
Yeah.
So if any of you don't know this about Don, he lives in California, San Diego primarily, and has written extensively about the border and the drug crisis there. And I think it's important for us as Tennesseans that I ask you this question. So the Biden, I'm going to try not to read in my newsman voice, but the Biden administration.
No, go ahead. I like it.
There we go. So the Biden administration just announced that it's ending the use of the Title 42 public health order to expel migrants at the border in late May. So Tennessee senators, especially U.S. Senators Marsha Blackburn, Senator Haggerty, they have both been to the border. And they go to the border. This is obviously a very important topic for their supporters. The Senator Haggerty just went there and he introduced the bill and said, quote, U.S. border agents told me that there's going to be a tidal wave of illegal immigration waiting for the 23rd of May to get there. There'll be no way they can handle it. They'll be completely overwhelmed. You're at the border. What do you think?
Well, I always love it when I hear that politicians go to the border and then they are experts.
Right. I was there for one day.
Well,
I can
less
tell you
than
about
one
it.
day, I'll
Less
tell
than
you.
one day, right?
I have either walked, driven, or rode on horseback every mile of that border. I've been out there with the Border Patrol. I was out there with the Border Patrol when we'd have to crawl up into I love this phrase, bullet-resistant vehicle.
Oh, it's comforting.
Not bulletproof.
Right.
Bullet resistant.
Right.
When you would look at 3 condominium buildings owned by the Tijuana Cartel, where they had snipers who had a $300,000 bounty to shoot Border Patrol agents. So I get a little impatient with these visits to the border and then pronouncements about what should happen, like build a wall. Let me tell you, can I talk about the wall for a
Please
minute?
do.
The wall's never been built, folks. A few stretches have been repaired. People go over it all the time. But 97% of the drugs that come into the country from Mexico come through open gates that are open 24/7. At the El Paso crossing, a tractor-trailer truck goes across that border every 15 seconds. These are not my figures. This is from the DEA Annual Threat Assessment Report.
Okay.
So to build a wall does literally nothing to stop the flow of drugs because the drugs are coming through the gates that are open. So that was a total farce, a total scam, a total lie. But let me try to answer the question you actually asked me. The solution to the immigration, there might be a flood of immigration.
Sure.
I'm sure there will be. The solution to the immigration problem does not lie at the border. It lies in Washington, and it lies in Mexico City, and it lies in El Salvador. It does not lie in the border. We have never had a comprehensive, fair immigration policy because Congress refuses to do it, like the 2 people that you just mentioned refused to do it. What they will do is they'll go down to the border, they'll get their pictures taken, they'll get some nice footage, they'll spend an hour with a Border Patrol agent and get the quote that they want.
So I just wondered, are we talking about political theater here for the most part?
Yes, we're talking about political theater. Listen, I've lived on that border for 30 years. It's not the violent battleground of invading hordes of criminals that it's been pictured to be. I don't know what to tell you. I'm a white guy. I eat more tortillas than I eat bread because I live in, within that culture.
Right.
We go to weddings together and funerals and high school graduations and all of that. It's a very nice blend of culture.
Yeah.
But again, and I've said this so many times at the risk of boring everybody, the so-called Mexican drug problem is not the Mexican drug problem, it's the American drug problem. We are the consumers. We send $60 billion a year down to Mexico to fund drug violence. We send massive amounts of guns across that border going the other direction. If anyone should build the wall, it should be the Mexicans.
Now there's your quote for the evening, ladies and gentlemen, right there.
So similarly with the immigration problem, right? We need to have a policy that will allow people to come to work without risking their lives because we need that labor. Trust me, I live there. We need that labor. And to have, yes, sorry, a path to citizenship. End of political sermon.
It's interesting because we are in Nashville, which is I can't remember who said it, but we're just like a blue island in a red sea. And so it is an extremely passionate conversation piece for a lot of people.
Of course.
It is ultimately, a dividing line between a whole lot of people. And so when I knew you were coming here, I was like, oh, I got to play newsman for a minute and ask you about that. I wanted your take on it.
It's completely fair. I spent 23 years writing about the Mexican drug situation, a third of my life.
So I'm going to take your word on this. I know you're there.
I'm there.
Folks, I want any of you to feel free to ask any questions. I have a habit of asking so many questions that my wife, who is here tonight, often says, it's okay to let other people ask some questions. So you all think about it. Raise your hand if you've got some, and I will happily start to the right with this young man.
Do you outline or do you answer?
I do not outline.
Oh, come on, Don.
I don't.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm serious.
Any idea what the ending's going to be?
Yeah, sometimes. Well, listen, with the drug books, for instance, those are basically documentaries. And so I had this sort of touchstones of what I thought were significant events in the drug wars that I knew that I would hit in a fictional way. So in that sense, yes. This book, this trilogy, sort of similarly, because I knew the overarching, arc of this guy's life. But no, I don't outline, and here's why. I know myself well enough, little Irish Catholic boy that I am, that if I did an outline like Sister Mary Teresa taught me, I would follow it slavishly.
Yeah, right.
And you're probably aware of this too.
Yep.
You might be the same way, Jeremy, that I like to be surprised. Because I feel if I'm surprised, the reader's going to be surprised. I sometimes like to paint myself into a corner because it's so much fun getting out.
Right.
And I feel that maybe, do you feel the same way?
I think that what I know great writers do is that they put their characters in such perilous situations that even they can't figure out.
Right.
And then if you can figure it out, then there you go. But I'm so glad you asked the question, because any of us who are writers, even if you do an outline, you have to break away from it.
Yeah.
Because the story will guide you.
It will.
In the way that you want to go.
Yeah.
And you just have to have the guts to say, I'm going to break out of this outline.
Yeah.
There's another question over here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I was reading your interview in Crime Reads, and you said Godfather, obviously, huge influence on this. But The Godfather is from Michael's perspective.
Right.
And this is almost really like from Carlo's perspective. So what's it like writing from that perspective for a crime novel?
Yeah, I think anybody who writes an OC, an organized crime, mob novel, you're going to have to acknowledge The Godfather, both as a novel and a film, Goodfellas, both as the book Wise Guy in the film, Casino, and of course The Sopranos. Once you do that, you're writing in that tradition, but then you have to forget them. You just have to forget them. The reason I chose Danny instead of one of the central characters, because logic would tell you if you're going to write a novel based on the Iliad, you would do it from Hector's perspective, who is Pat Murphy in this book, or you do it from Achilles' perspective, right? A guy named Sal Antonucci in this book. I always kind of like to point my compass true north and then kick it. So it goes like that. I like that little outsider slant. And the advantage of having, in your analogy, Carlo tell the story, is that he's in it but not of it. Okay? So he can perform actions that move the story forward. At the same time, he's enough of an outsider he can observe it and comment on it. Usually not verbally sometimes, but in his thoughts. And that's why I chose him. Did that answer the question you asked, sir? Great.
It's a really astute question. You actually asked it better than I did. Having a supportive character tell this story, making that comparison was really sharp. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Years ago, after reading the Mexican Drug Cartel trilogy, I posted on social media that if Barack Obama had a brain in his head, he would appoint you drug czar for the entire country. My question is, if Joe Biden called you tomorrow and said, Don, I want you to solve this problem, would you become drug czar?
I would not, but I'd be happy to talk with him. A number of years ago, after the Cartel came out, I took out a full-page ad in the Washington Post, to President Obama and Congress, advocating an end to the war on drugs. And people hate hearing this. In my opinion, the only solution is legalization and decriminalization across the board. Once you declare a war on drugs, you've already lost the war, because it's not a war. It's not a law enforcement problem. It's certainly not a military problem. It's a social health problem. And until we ask and answer, and I'm going to stop preaching in a second, I promise you, the following question, we are never going to solve it. And the question is, what hurts? Opioids, for instance, are always a response to pain, and thank God we have them. But not a very small percentage of people addicted to opioids are addicted because of physical pain. If you go to a doctor, the first thing he or she is going to ask you is, where does it hurt? Yeah. What's the hurt? What's the hurt that we spend $60 billion a year to try to ease? And until we address that problem, we're never going to get anywhere with it. You are never going to get anywhere with it by trying to interdict the supply side, as long as there's a demand side. And that's what I would tell President Biden. It's what I told President Obama. Not a single politician got back to me. But I heard from about 60 cops, including the police chiefs of several large cities. And we had, at first, hostile, but then quite interesting conversations. And I'm very happy to tell you that in 2 of these cities' jails now, there are drug treatment centers that arose from those conversations. So it was all worth it.
It's never good when, as a journalist, better questions are coming from the crowd than you're asking. But thank you. That was press conference worthy question. Well done. I saw someone else's hand over here. Yes, ma'am.
I am curious about your thoughts on the Supreme Court leak last night.
Well, listen, this is no surprise. This has been a 50-year campaign. And people were always wondering, and I never knew why they wondered, why, for instance, evangelical Christians and the Christian right would support a man who had 27 credible accusations of sexual assault, who bragged about accosting women, who paid money to a porn star, hush money to a porn star, and why the Christian right still supported him. Today you know that answer. He delivered the 3 judges that they needed.
It's a, I think that's, it's a topic that I think is weighing like a heavy storm over all of us right now. It's like you can almost feel it, and what's going to happen next. Because, obviously you go through news cycles, but this isn't a news cycle that's going to end. It never has. No. But we are now at this phase where I think there is an article that I have saved on my phone, is what this means the day after. What is this going to do? And I think that is what it's almost like the war on drugs. Yeah. It's, we have so many of these oppressive issues that are facing us right now as a nation, that it is, I guess what I could say is that it's understandable why someone of yourself that is self-made, that has made a living, is on a great living off of what you love doing, to say, I feel like I have to do something.
Yeah, look, I mean, I always felt as a novelist that we had a role, that we could show people the world in a way that maybe journalists couldn't, with all due respect, Jeremy.
It's what we say, the first draft of history is what we've got.
Right.
It's true.
Or shouldn't, because we have the freedom, the license to show the interior, emotional, mental life of characters. And I think that always let us get under the headlines. So you could talk about, illegal immigration. And by the way, I object to that phrase. I have a sign in my window that says no human being is illegal. I have it in 4 or 5 languages. But that's a headline. Headlines always become stereotypes. Yeah. Always. But if in a novel, I can get a reader to spend, let's say, hours and hours with a 10-year-old Central American boy coming up on a train journey to the United States. You're going to see it differently. We can talk about the opioid epidemic. It's a headline, it's a stereotype, but if I can get you to spend those same hours with a 26-year-old heroin-addicted young lady, you're going to see it differently. I always thought that maybe that was useful.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure, but I think maybe the utility of that, or my utility of that, has been played out, and now it needs to be more direct.
But I think what you strike at, it's the empathy, right?
Yeah.
It's how we learn.
You put it better than I did.
You know, is if you can truly, it's the whole phrase of if you walk a mile in a man's shoes. If you can do that, if you can have that empathy, it changes your perspective. Mm-hmm. The question is, as a society, are we as a people able to change our perspective? And I think that's the struggle you know, that we're all going to go through. Did you have a question, sir? Or was I was going to say, no, I didn't know if your hand was up. I wanted to, because like I said, I have a danger of asking all the questions. Yes, sir.
So in preparation for tonight, I went through the Cartel, the trilogy.
Good Lord.
I was
Did you read the whole thing before you came?
no, not today.
Okay, great. I was going to say that's quite the accomplishment. So.
Jeremy, I've never read the whole thing.
There you go.
But in the last 3 months, I've read all three of them again.
Okay.
And so looking at these stories, like one of the things, I had several moments where I was like, oh my God, did that just happen? And it happens in like 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Without giving too much away for anyone who hasn't read them, is there any like, was there a part of one of those stories that happened to you as you were writing? You're like, oh my God, I just wrote that.
Oh yeah.
And because, I mean, I literally had to go back and like, okay, hold on a second. Someone was there, they're not there, what happened?
Yeah.
2 lines.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
Spoiler, he does it in this.
yeah, well,
Already that, you know, that you're like, wait, what? You know, and like I said, there's no fat. So it just like jumps right to it.
Yes, is the answer, and I wish it were otherwise. Every incident in those 3 books actually happened in one form or another. Now, I might have moved the chronology around for dramatic purposes, and obviously everything's fictionalized and the characters are fictionalized, but if you're referring to some of the incidents of violence, every one of them happened. And in fact, there were incidents that I knew for a fact happened, because I saw the video, that were so horrific, I couldn't write them. Because I thought they were almost surreal, that the reader would not believe them, and that they were just so horrific I didn't want to do it to people. I quit after each of those books, by the way. After Dog, Power of the Dog, I swore I would never go back to that world. And after Dog, we hadn't even imagined the sort of violence that was going to happen in the next phase that the Cartel covered, you know? So, yeah. Yeah.
And I think we find this so much in our real life, is that when that type of violence occurs, and it does every day, from a journalist perspective, and we tell the story, oftentimes it's crazier what happens in real life than we could even imagine.
Yes.
And it is weak. And like you said, you see that and you think, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't revisit that.
Yeah.
But especially why it was important, I think, in those books is that it humanized. It does. I mean, sometimes when you see a violent event happen to someone that you have come to care about,
Yeah.
it does make a difference. So, yes, ma'am.
So, how do you recover from the book? Like when you finish and you say you quit, but you've seen these horrific films, and how do you, what's your recovery process? Right.
In all candor, because I wouldn't come here to lie to you, I don't know that I ever have completely. You know, I spent 15 years of my career as an investigator. That included homicide cases, arson, child sexual abuse, everything you can imagine.
So you wanted to do the second book.
Oh, well, things got so much worse in Mexico. Unimaginably worse. The escalation of the violence and the sadism was literally unbelievable. And I'm sitting on the sidelines writing kind of funny books about surfers in San Diego. And I had promised my wife I would not go back and do another Mexican drug book. And I'd promised myself, my agent would call and ask if I was going to do one, I'd hang up. Or I'd pretend to be a pizza parlor. I'd just say, 20 minutes, and
That's
hang the
right.
phone up. And then I felt guilty. I just felt guilty. I felt like, sounds immodest. It is immodest. I felt that I could explain to the American and European reader what was happening in ways that were not being explained, in the media, and certainly not by politicians. And I thought, but here I am, safely sitting, on this side of the border, while over 200 Mexican journalists were murdered covering those stories. I knew that I had the background knowledge and the connections to explain it, albeit in a fictional way. And I don't know, one morning I just got up and I started typing. And then after that book, I quit again. I said, no, I cannot do it. I cannot do it. And then 2016 happened, and the heroin epidemic happened, and the immigration issues came to the fore again. And one more time I thought, I can explain this. I can write a novel that will give people a different viewpoint of this. And so I did. Somewhere in there, I took out that ad in the Washington Post because, frankly, ma'am, I thought if I don't do something proactive, I'm just another guy making money off dope.
That is another great quote that you can take home with you, ladies and gentlemen. We got to get this man to sign some books, but I wanted to see if anybody else had. Absolutely.
Do you have a plan for your next stage at the game here? Are you just going to tweet all the time? Or?
Well, I should say, are the other two books written, or are
The other
they-
two books are written.
Oh wow,
They're in the can. I'm done.
you're done. Now, see, I was under the understanding that you still had to write these.
No.
So, wow, you can.
No, I
You
am.
can sit back and tweet, and
I can
take
sit
naps
back and tweet. Oh, yeah, we have a plan. Shane and I do the videos together. I do the tweets. And, for the next month, I'm doing this. And then I'm going to take a short gasping spell, and then we're going to dive into it. But we're in the process of recruiting what we call our digital army. If you'd like to join, hit us up.
I've seen that on Twitter, and I've seen people ask you, what can we do? Where do we...
Yeah, what we want to put together is sort of a rapid response team, like the Obamas had, that can instantly respond to some of the scurrilous lies that come across social media, and turn that around within hopefully minutes, and then produce videos to hopefully persuade people on some issues. But I think realistically, and Jeremy would probably know this better than I would, I think in some sense we're going to be reactive because we're going to be dependent on the news in terms of what we respond to.
To some degrees, like the comparisons with the Lincoln Project, I think.
Yeah, we
you
know
what I
them
mean?
well. Yeah.
They do a great job.
Yep.
And if you all haven't watched it, speaking about what Don had said, watch 60 Minutes about the birds aren't real story. Have you seen this?
No.
And when I watched it, I was like, I can't believe 60 Minutes is doing a story on it until 60 Minutes did a story on
Yeah.
it. And it is literally about how this hysteria about not controversies, but fictional
Conspiracy
theories. Thank you.
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories, and how these young people have made this their mission and made comedy out of it. And it's another digital digital enterprise to fight misinformation.
Yeah, listen, Clausewitz famously said that you should fight a battle always on the ground of your own choosing. That's nice, but we don't always get to choose. And I think that the battleground now is social media. And, we have to fight the battle where we find it.
Yeah, the misinformation war is certainly that. Do we get everybody's questions?
There's a gentleman in the back standing.
I know some of your work has been adapted into films, and just wondering if there's any plans to, excuse me, any plans to adapt any of your other work, and if that's something that
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I found out a couple of days ago that Netflix has bought all my surfer books and stories about a guy named Boone Daniels and his crew at Pacific Beach, and hired a director already. And so that's headed for Netflix as a series. Liam Neeson and I are talking. Doesn't that sound weird?
Well, it's really
As
not
it
that
came
weird,
out of
'cause
my mouth,
but-
it sounded
I was just on the phone with him earlier.
strange. Yeah.
So, but what can you talk about? What
Yeah,
which project it is?
Yeah, he's interested in a novella of mine called Broken. Someone else has just written a really good script on another novella of mine called Crime 101. Nobody is developing the novella of mine that has my favorite ever sentence that I ever wrote.
What is it?
My favorite ever sentence that I ever wrote: no one knows how the chimp got the revolver.
Thank you. We're done. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you, Nashville.
Actually, I got to tell you, that's got to be a last book, right? Like I see
No,
that
it's-
cover. You
It was
know?
published. It's the one I was supposed to come here for and got canceled because of COVID. And I didn't know how the chimp got the revolver.
But you just knew you had.
I just made it up as I went along. No outline, just like, no one knows how the chimp got the revolver. Okay, well, let's just, riff from there.
But isn't this also in development too?
It is. That was been bought by Sony Pictures. The whole trilogy was outright purchased. FX is in fact, I'm missing a meeting with them right now on Zoom. They're doing a television series, a multi-year series of the Cartel trilogy.
Oh, that's great.
Matt Damon is doing a book of mine called The Force.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And as we say, Leonardo DiCaprio, I've never met him, is doing a book of mine called Satori. So,
Well, I just wish you could work with bigger names to get your books out there because, well, that's really fantastic. I mean, what a great
yeah, life's
great
good,
ride.
Yeah, it's been a great ride.
And the fun thing for
very
all of
lucky.
us, is that we, as this expands into movies and everything, we'll see new versions of it and their interpretations of it, and
Yeah.
it'll be a lot of fun.
It's
So,
the long goodbye, right? There's 2 more books after this,
Right.
and then they'll be
will they
inflicting
come out every year? for
every
the next-
year, every year for
okay.
every year for 2 years.
Every
yeah,
year for 2 years,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. See, I'm trying to trick
They'll come
you.
out both
tricking you.
years. Yeah.
I'm gonna say on
Yeah.
year 3, I'll be like, remember you said it kept coming. So
Yeah.
what you got? What you got for
April
us?
23, April 24, City of Dreams and City in Ruins.
Oh, wow, we got the titles too.
Yeah.
Don, thank you.
Thank you
It was
very
a
much. It's
real
fun,
pleasure.
Jeremy. Thank you.